consent to address the House for 1 minute and otherwise extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to report on the situation of California's water supply, which really is the nation's water supply, as so much of our food source comes from California. 90 to 99% of our specialty crops, tomatoes, pistachios, almonds, walnuts, so many of these crops come from California if we're allowed to grow them. Water supply is a core part of that. So we have a situation in Northern California where each year it's a challenge to refill our lakes. Lake Oroville holds 3.5 million acre feet, Lake Shasta 4.5, Trinity Lake 2.5 million, which is a total of about 10.5 million acre feet. A lot of water. We have the potential to build Sites Reservoir, another 1.5 million acre feet. We could raise Shasta Dam and gain another 600,000 acre feet, a total of 12.5 million acre feet. Yet we aren't allowed to store that water. There is so much water now being devoted for other purposes that aren't for people, that are not for hydroelectric power. Indeed, they're tearing out hydroelectric dams in my district right now at a time when we want to go green with more CO2-free power and electrify everything. We have to do much better with corralling and saving our water supply for people's needs in California so it benefits the whole country. I yield back.
For what purpose?
As you know, the wildfire situation in the West...
The gentleman will suspend. Does the gentleman seek unanimous consent to address the House?
1 minute and address.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Okay. It's a new week. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you know, the issue with wildfire in the West has been very devastating for several years now. Many, many years, but incredibly large fires in the last 5 to 7, 10 years or so. And so we've needed more and more help from FEMA post-fire. And so what we're working on is bipartisan legislation. It's going to be called H.R. 7070 that will direct FEMA to update its regulations for the Fire Management Assistance Grant, public assistance, and mitigation. This will help after fire to respond to unique challenges of wildfires and improve wildfire mitigation. What I'm saying is debris removal, emergency protective measures, and impacts to drinking water sources. So it will help improve FEMA's cost-benefit analysis for wildfire projects to help them be more competitive for federal funding. We find this is extremely important in the communities that are devastated after fire, and it's still fairly new territory for FEMA when we're talking the size of and scope of fires we've had in the recent years, jumping from 4- and 5-digit sized fires to six digits, hundreds of thousands, even 1 million acres, like in the Dixie Fire in my district a couple years ago. So this legislation will give FEMA more flexibility and better serve the people. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Objection. The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. What you see here is the environmentalist dream coming true. They in the state of California are celebrating the largest dam removal project, which is happening on the upper Klamath River on California and Oregon. While actually their work is killing endangered species, causing roads to slough off because the lake has gone down, is disappearing, threatening homes with bank collapse, and it's already seen drinking water wells going dry. The fish they purport to be saving are dying because of the nasty water and nasty effluent coming out of those dams. Supposedly, they're trying to save fish. They purposely have made a disaster, now leaving the locals to figure out how to clean up their mess. Dam removal advocates have refused to see the big picture all these years, trusting a mere questionable master's thesis over the locals who actually knew better. So we're seeing dead fish. This picture depicts 3 dead deer that went out into the muck, that came out of the bottom of those dams and are stuck there. Nobody could rescue them, so the Fish and Game had to shoot them from a distance and leave them there. And this is only the beginning of the many miles of muck that are going to be going down that river, causing death, destruction, and a smell to high heaven there that all the locals are having to deal with. There's more to come on this topic. This is not a win for environment, fish, or anybody else. I yield back.
To my distinguished colleague from the great state of California, Representative LaMalfa.
Thank my colleague from New Jersey for leading us here tonight and the opportunity to speak on several good topics here. So, well, tonight, indeed, we passed a very important tax-related legislation that will be instructive in so many aspects of our society with investment, job opportunities. Indeed, I think the tax bill we just passed probably was responsible for over 600,000 new jobs in the research and development tax credits, as well as for small businesses that are going to have the accelerated depreciation that is important to them for, again, small business, farms, for investing in equipment. But one of the things I wanted to dwell on here a little bit was that the importance of the disaster relief aspect that's in this bill that also my colleague Mr. Stubbe from Florida was working very strongly on, and my colleague from the wine country in Northern California, Mr. Mike Thompson, helped us with, is that we've had a situation where fire survivors, fire victims of so much destructive wildfire in Northern California and other parts of the West, in this situation here, their taxation on the settlement money they had with the utility was deemed by IRS to be a taxable event. And so even though they're victims of fire, they've lost their homes and much destruction of their property, the dollars that were coming for restitution from a lawsuit were deemed taxable by the IRS. And so this put out people to the tunes of tens of thousands of dollars of taxes that they really can't afford because they still have to put their homes back in order and build new homes and all this. So it really wasn't intended as a taxable event in that sense. So this package included important pieces of that, our original bill that got added as part of the tax package that will make it where folks that have already unfortunately had to pay this tax because of the timing of things will be able to seek a refund. We'll work with the IRS to make sure those refunds are expedited as best as possible, but prevent future taxation on that and other disasters that have an award involved like that, East Palestine and issues in Florida. So it's indeed a big success on that, as well as the other aspects of this tax legislation tonight that were going to be helpful for boosting our economy, boosting small business and large business with investment and bringing over 600,000 jobs back to their country in a time that we really, really need that investment. We need that boost. So I'm indeed very glad that we were able to accomplish that here tonight and look forward to the Senate taking it up and the President signing that legislation expeditiously. What's important about this nuance is that it be done before the upcoming tax season, April 15th. Some have to file March 1st, depending, and that they don't get caught in that again, having to pay a tax prospectively for something they really aren't going to owe. So we need to get the language in place, the rules in place on that after the successful passage in the Senate and by the President's signature. So indeed, it was a great bipartisan effort, one maybe you don't always see that often around here. We need to see more of, and working both sides on that and having that big success. So for the folks that were the survivors of the Camp Fire, the Zog Fire, the Carr Fire in Northern California, and others that are going to be affected, your patience has been rewarded. I thank you for your patience and for working with our office and giving us the chance to get it over the goal line. And, I would have liked to see it happen much faster as well, but, things have been a little tough around here. And indeed, now we were able to have success with this tonight. So a couple more steps, but I really strongly believe we're going to get there. And so this is going to be great for those not only disaster victims, but all Americans, and the boost it's going to be for our economy with the broad tax package. So very pleased to see it happen. With that, I'll yield back to my colleague, and thank you for the time.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every state in our country has been negatively impacted by the Biden administration's wide open border policies. Last week, I traveled to Cochise County, Arizona with the Congressional Western Caucus and the Committee on Natural Resources to tour our southern border and discuss President Biden's border policies and how it's affecting our federal lands and parks. While in Arizona, my colleague Rep. Tom Tiffany and I decided to follow up on the story that James O'Keefe had exposed that alleged the Casa Elitis Ramada Hotel in Tucson was housing illegal immigrants at taxpayer expense. Congress has the right, of course, to exercise oversight as federal funds prop up these locations and the non-government organizations known as NGOs that are secretly housing these illegals. Congress has a right to see how American tax dollars are being spent. We have that accountability. Instead, we were denied access to even the parking lot, given no information, and they even called the sheriff's office on us. We'll be back. Congress must immediately investigate and hold on-site hearings and get down to this. These NGOs that wrap themselves in charity and in religion in some cases are making a lot of money off this and are actually undermining the security of our country by trying to move people as fast as they can into this process. These NGOs must publicly testify before Congress and, more importantly, the American public about how our tax dollars are being used and what for. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute and it is right.
So much time as he may consume, to my good friend and colleague from the great state of California. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore from Utah, for leading us once again on this important time to get the message out in front of the American people that wish to pay attention. So just following up a little bit on what Mr. Grothman was talking about on the border and the horrific illegal immigration and so how many are coming into this country is just overwhelming. I had an experience here last week in Tucson, myself and Mr. Rep. Tom Tiffany from Minnesota. We both, after a border tour, had attempted to stop in at a illegal immigrant, well, they call them migrants. That's a euphemism. They say we're migrants. It drives me crazy listening to that. An intake area that what had been a Ramada motel there, run under the guise of a group called Casa Elitas. And so it's run not with a whole lot of daylight on how they operate there. Again, we have many NGOs, non-government organizations that are making a lot of money and are incentivized to move a lot of illegal immigrants into this country and place them where have you. You know, the bus loads going here and there and everywhere. Plane rides. My understanding is there's been approximately 5,000 plane rides, plane fulls, since the start of the Biden administration on moving people around the country. And so we attempted to meet with people there and say, you know, just, it was quiet. They weren't intaking anybody at the time. And they would not see us. They would not see us. Even we had our IDs, you know, 2 members of the U.S. House of Representatives, to sit down with somebody and see what they're doing and at least give us a few minutes on an overview. They refused to do that. They basically kept us at the outside of the parking lot and called the sheriff's office in case we decided to try and go knock on the door and talk to somebody in charge. It was amazing that the people that are in charge of the U.S. House, you know, those that are elected to make expenditures, taxpayer expenditures, taxpayer appropriations, were shut out of being able to ask questions about how tax dollars are being used of the intake of these illegal immigrants in Tucson. So, folks, obviously we have a giant problem. The numbers are horrendous. Mr. Grossman was talking about the fentanyl. And what's interesting about that, so much fentanyl coming in this country, so negatively affecting and, you know, taking lives, that so much is coming in. And he talked about the market pricing. The price is so low, the price of actually buying it is really low now because there's so much of it. Price and demand. When a high volume comes in, they have to cut their prices. It's such a high volume now, the price of it is getting dirt cheap, they're talking like. So it's just another example of the Biden administration working against the people, working against American values. There's no reason it needs to be this way. Say, oh, the Republicans aren't passing a law in Congress, no bills. Biden has the tools. He could do 8 executive orders that were perfectly legal, perfectly constitutional, remain in Mexico policy, several others he could do without even passing a bill. But there's plenty of laws to already enforce that they aren't doing. Yes, we added H.R. 2 to that to help define better asylum, because asylum is being abused, and other good aspects, beefing up the personnel at the border, finishing the fence. They don't want to do any of that. That's all double talk. So that's a bit of my experience at the border just again the other day here. Another thing that President Biden has caused unnecessarily harm to our country is our energy policy, or lack of. The core of so much of our problems on costs of inflation, high prices of everything, is it starts at the cost of energy. Whether it's electricity that's generated, they're tearing out hydroelectric dams in my district that has green renewable power. Electricity generated by nuclear power. We need to do a lot more on that. And so far, for years and years, that's been held down by permitting and the inability for government to move on that. But also, natural gas, a very important component for heating homes as well as operating electricity generation. And so Biden has stepped forward to make it almost impossible to explore for oil and gas in this country. And also a recent decision to slash all pending and future liquefied natural gas export permits. And this is important because were we exporting this to Europe, for example, to Germany or others, instead of them relying on Russian gas coming in on that big pipeline, we could be helping because we have such an abundance. So the Biden administration, another wrong-headed approach on energy, harming Americans, harming our allies around the world. He systematically destroyed key energy initiatives, canceling the Keystone Pipeline, shutting down already authorized oil and gas programs in like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, a really tiny part of a $1.3 million acre refuge in Alaska. It's been approved. They're shutting it down. The high prices of everything start with the cost of energy. Americans suffer from high price of food, transportation, everything else because energy costs way more than it needs to. We lay that at President Biden's feet, and we have the ability to be energy independent like we were under President Trump, an energy exporter and helping our allies. Yet what we have is a ban on being an exporter and a ban on new exploration to make us energy independent. Biden administration is way out of whack on this, and we need to do something. The American people need to let them hear about it. The American people need to make themselves heard on that as we try here in this time here in Congress and this speeches like this tonight to do so. So I appreciate the time. I appreciate Mr. Moore leading us on this to talk about these important topics of energy independence and controlling our border, two of the most important components we'd have to a more orderly society in this country. Thank you for the time.
Thank you to the gentleman from California. I agree. Horrible energy policy, horrible immigration and border policy, mental incompetency. I mean, these are all great Valentine's messages today.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary, for your time and effort here today and what you do. I can't let that dam removal bit in the system that Mr. Reamer was talking about go by. Yes, that would be very devastating for the shipping of crops in that area, as it's been devastating in my Northern California area with the removal of the Klamath dams partly underway now, and the filth and stink and stench and muck that is moving down the Klamath River ostensibly to be helping fish. The wildlife that has been wiped out there, fish, you see hundreds of dead fish in the photos and deer that have been trapped out there that Fish and Game had to shoot. All sorts of things going on with that. And then also on the hit list, and that's devastating agriculture in the Klamath Basin, as well as the water taken away from the Scott and Shasta rivers down below. Also the Eel River, where there's a dam slated on the hit list there that'll devastate part of wine country. So dam removal is not something that Congress controls, otherwise we would have put a stop to that. It's runaway agencies and environmental groups. So the issue with forestry in my district in the West, we've suffered the Camp Fire a few years ago. 85 people lost their lives in Paradise area, and then the Dixie Fire a couple years later, a 1 million acre fire, in addition to the many hundreds of thousands of acres of fire, individual 100,000 acre fires. As you know, in the whole West, it's millions per year. So the issue comes down to what is Forest Service doing and the other entities, but we'll talk about Forest Service on federal lands to get the job done. I know they, a couple years ago, put out a concept of 20 million by over 10 years of forest treatment. Well, they have about 200 million acres in their purview. So that would mean 2 million acres per year, over 200 million acres. That would take 100 years to cover that if they were actually doing that. So we've given tools in past farm bills and are trying to enhance that in this current farm bill with more categorical exclusions to help move the ball, but they haven't taken advantage of them. As of recently, it only put a handful of them out to move that. We have good demonstrations. We had a Tahoe project some years ago that when wildfire hit that, the fire basically stopped where that treatment had happened. Other areas where treatment had happened on private lands. So, Secretary, what can we do to get the Forest Service to act and stop the lengthy delays in the project planning process and use these categorical exclusions as we're trying to advance more so in the Farm Bill and make larger areas, 10,000, 15,000 acres, which is a drop in the bucket on the millions of acres?
Well, first of all, Congressman, 85% of the work that's being done is being done under the CE effort. So we are utilizing that tool on our ongoing, regular, consistent basis.
Well, that's good, but 85% of how much?
Well, 85%, well, last year I think we did 4.2 million acres. And not every acre of land obviously is the same, so what we've been able to do is identify where the risks are the highest. We've established a number of about 250 priority fire sheds where we are providing resources for treatment because we see that as the highest risk. And each year we're making the mark, or meeting the mark that we set for treatment. And then we're following up in areas that have been devastated in the past with reforestation efforts.
But part of the problem is that in certain situations, burned acres are counted as treatment. And so when you're looking at the overall volume that we have to do, we have millions of acres we have to get done. And what I'm getting at is we have to have the private sector. We have to use all possible tools. Good neighbor authority, we need tribes, we need local governments, we need cooperation, and not just
being done.
Slow.
All of those tools are being used in a very extensive way.
But to the volume, I'm talking, pace and scale. We got to scale it up dramatically or we're going to keep burying millions. Let me shift quickly to the climate smart. I'm looking at some of the figures on that. First of all, on the goals, what are we hoping to reach? That's a 5-year program, right?
Correct.
Okay, and it was funded by the IRA, right?
No. It's funded by...
Well, there's a kick-in of money towards that from the IRA, right?
No.
CCC, all right, thank you. But there was an influx of dollars to the, anyway, let me what I'm getting at. I see the stated goal of 60 million metric tons of CO2. What's our baseline? What percent of the atmosphere right now is CO2?
I don't know what the percent is. The idea here isn't so much the specific amount, it's learning what works and what doesn't work, so that we can make sure that in the future we are using resources, conservation resources, in the most effective.
Okay, tell me this then, because farmers are going to have to change practices to participate, and they could be frozen out.
No.
If everybody's doing this. I'm a farmer in my real life too. I farm rice, and so basically if CO2 tie-up means no-till, I do not have that as an option, whereas a neighboring crop might have no-till as an option. I don't. So we're going to be left behind. The farmers like the current conservation programs that are out there, EQIP and the others, but this new one here is going to require them to jump through hoops in order to maybe be competitive or not. So just, can you just close on that and I'll yield?
Can I?
Go ahead.
Do you want me to respond?
Please, Secretary.
It's voluntary. It basically creates an opportunity for us to learn what works and what doesn't work. And it doesn't necessarily put people at a competitive disadvantage at all, because you also have the regular conservation programs that are utilizing. And it's not requiring them to go through a series of hoops. And in some cases, it's actually paying them for what they're already doing. But the idea here is to measure, monitor, and verify the results so that we know what works and what doesn't work, so that we don't invest in what doesn't work.
Okay. The CO2 number is 0.04% of the atmosphere. I yield back.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm fascinated by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle with being so fixated on Ukraine when our porous southern border, our U.S. borders, are causing us so much harm to our American economy and losing American lives, such as Lake and Riley here most recently. We've been fairly generous to Ukraine since their problems have started with Russia. Indeed, the amount of money they've received is at least 20-fold more than what we're even talking about that would secure our own southern border. So now we see President Biden will be chasing our former President Trump down to the border in a reality desperate attempt to stabilize his plummeting poll numbers on the issue. But let's not be kidded by that. Today's visit, much like Biden's first and only other visit to our southern border, will be basically a photo op. He'll be visiting Brownsville, Texas, an area of the southern border that, according to reports, has had virtually non-existent activity in recent days, weeks, and months compared to all the other places along the border that you can see plenty of footage of tens of thousands of people coming across. So distract here by going over there, huh? This visit is nothing more than a smokescreen, an attempt to distract the American people from his disastrous policies and the chaos he has unleashed at our southern border. For the past 3 years, President Biden has not only ignored the crisis at the border, he's directly responsible for it. Since his first day in office, he's worked to implement his own far-left failed policies, which turned every town in the whole country basically into a border town, and destroyed countless American families that we have to talk about here on the floor since the media doesn't seem to want to cover that very well. There's over 60 instances of President Biden and his administration taking actions that undermined our nation's border security. The first things he did when he came into office were to get rid of the procedures and the policies that President Trump had put into place, yet now recently in the press he's yelling at Republicans to say, you need to pack back some of our border policies we're working on. Really? Put back in place the policies already worked. These 8 items right here. He could do all of these without having Congress fund or come to agreement in a bipartisan fashion on any of them. End catcher and release. Reinstate and the Remain in Mexico policy. Enter into an asylum cooperation agreement. End parole abuses. Detain inadmissible aliens. Wow, wouldn't that be something? Use expedited removal process. Rein in taxpayer-funded benefits for all illegal aliens. Wouldn't that be a relief for families who are struggling? Issue a proclamation to suspend or restrict entry in the United States. Those are actions he could take on his own without having to battle it through both sides of the aisle on both House and Senate. We would be happy to do that as Republicans. Republicans have been standing for these types of policies all along. It all changed under the Biden administration. That's why we've suffered these last 3 years with these mass amounts of people coming across our border illegally and invading our country. We know border security is national security. That's why the bill we passed, H.R. 2, earlier on, is the right policy, yet it's sitting there languishing under Senator Schumer and the Senate Democrats who won't bring it up for a vote or discussion. Instead, they give us a watered-down immigration bill that would allow 1.8 million illegal immigrants a year into our country with immediate work permits, benefits, and ability to stay even longer, thereby codifying illegal immigration. Yeah, we're going to automatically concede 1.8 million can come in illegally without process, and we're going to give you stuff. Calling that a border security package and then reaming Republicans for not being for that, it's not even a funny joke. Let's look at the numbers. Since Biden took office, there's been 7.2 million illegal crossings of our southern border, 8.7 of all entries. The total number of illegal immigrants who have entered through our southern border is greater than the population of 36 of our individual states. Let's not forget about the terrorists. 340 individuals whose names appear on the terrorist watch list have been stopped trying to cross the southern border. And so far in 2024, there have been 58 individuals whose names appear on the list who have been stopped trying to enter the border. How many haven't been stopped? The total is more than the counters in all fiscal years 2017, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22 combined. That's how bad it has gotten to this point. It's not just terrorists crossing our border, it's also Chinese Communist Party nationals. 20,000 nationals have Chinese nationals have illegally crossed the southern border since fiscal year 24 began in October. So just last week, 22-year-old Georgia nursing student Laken Riley's life was taken. How many more examples of like that have to happen because of Biden's wide open policy
The gentleman's
and
time
today's
has
photo
expired.
op? We must do better. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
He died.
Yes.
Being a quarter mile from a burn pit for a year.
Yes.
And his children had a shot for college and other things.
Yes. The disability benefits is going to the survivors. This is really important. So thank you, Mr. President.
Hi, Mr. President.
Love those glasses.
I am looking forward to welcoming you to Georgia on Saturday.
I'm coming down.
I know. I'll be with you.
All right.
And I need you to bring that energy with you that you just had tonight.
I got a lot of energy. That's my problem.
Well, we love it.
Thank
you. And we're going to bring it home for you on Tuesday.
I didn't do it.
No, you didn't.
I swear to God, I didn't do it.
No, listen, we need some help from the Forest Service. This symbolizes the 86 people that died in the fire in Paradise, California. They made this for me, the residents there, part of the wood that is salvaged. So I said as chair of the Forestry Committee, what I'm asking is that our Forest Service needs to speed up the pace with which we harvest forests and make our communities fire safe. And we just held a hearing in South Dakota with the Nyman family. They're going to lose their business soon. If we don't have them, the Forest Service will never, ever keep up by themselves. We've got to have the private sector. We've got to increase the pace and scale of forestry.
Give them a phone and I'll call you.
I appreciate it.
You know, I've been there. In North Dakota, too.
Yes, sir.
I mean, I've flown over more timber burned to the ground.
It's killing the wildlife.
Than make up the entire state of the state of Maryland. And by the way,
a million-acre fire in my district 2 years ago.
And by the way, if you notice, you fly over in the helicopter, those places with good roofs, they didn't burn.
With the right materials.
Yeah. So we got to change that. Anyway.
We got to cut some trees. We're holding people up in business too, like Scranton, like folks just like Scranton. Right. Thanks so much, sir.
Or are they saying Scranton? You want me to sign it or something?
Oh no, I just want you to hold it. Think of the folks.
Thanks, man. I'm thinking of the folks. Yep. Some folks I'm thinking of start with Putin.
Not those folks. Thank you, sir. Thanks for that.
Thanks.
Okay.
By the way,
yes, sir.
The strongest support I have for my entire career is firefighters. Delaware has the highest percentage of volunteer firefighters of any state in the union. And we have fire school anyway.
We've got a ton at home too, but we're working also, we're getting there on getting firefighter pay like when it's built.
Good.
We'll be good on that.
I mean,
help our woodcutters, help our forestry industry, please. Get our Forest Service cracking. Okay.
Right this way.
Mr. President, can you say hi to my niece?
What's your name?
Marissa.
Hey, Marissa, how are you? Who's this guy?
He's wearing his Irish shirt.
You got your Irish shirt on? All right. Thank you.
All right, we have people waiting for us. We got to continue walking now.
You got the speakers team here. Thanks for coming tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you.
Now we're here.
All right.
You're both on overtime now, right? Since you're both on overtime.
Well, we still have to go downstairs. Still has to take photos.
Yeah. The home stretch.
Yeah.
Very closest majority. It's historic. Thank you for taking the time to say that, sir. Well, thank you, Mr. President. We appreciate that, sir.
Stick
right this way.
Right here, sir.
Yep. Okay.
Now we gotta go.
Right this way. We're straight out.
Straight out.
Straight out.
All right.
Straight out.
Got Team Clyburn over here.
You're looking good, man.
Oh, so are you. So are you.
You're looking good. You always look like you have, I don't know who your habitat is.
I told you, let's go shopping.
I'd like to.
Yeah. So this is Lindy. Also Team Clyburn. Yeah.
Lindy.
How are you? Good to see you again.
I work for Jim, too.
Lena.
Got it.
Give me that.
Get me
to work for here.
Oh, look at him. White button.
Is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, folks at home, they're wondering about their utility rates, why are they going up so high? And it isn't always the fault of the utility. When I look around and see what government does to make things cost so much more, whether it's stopping the exploration for oil and gas in order to run some power plants, or tearing dams down because they don't like dams because it might impede fish passage, so we don't have hydroelectric power. But then some of the demands government makes in order to give them a permit to operate once again like they've been doing for 50 or 100 years. Do you know they demand things like, well, we want you to build a road for us here and maintain it for us, even though the utility doesn't necessarily actually use that road, or at least a big chunk of that road. And they don't have a partnership with the Forest Service, for example, say, well, you do half, we'll do half. No, they just make demands. It's like Don Fanucci walking around in Godfather.
Please take your conversations outside. Sir, please continue.
Do I get extra time?
The House will be in order. Please.
The demands government makes of people to just operate, it's like Don Fanucci walking around in Godfather Part 2, just collecting a little bit from everybody. It has no nexus to the actual operation of the utility in order to just deliver electricity to the people. Government needs to be reined in on its demands, on the thuggery it is, in order to just do business. And so when people are wondering, why is my utility bill so high, it isn't just because evil utilities. It's government. Operating permits to trim around trees so we don't burn down all of Northern California. One thing after another. Government needs to be reeled in. The Forest Service has in its charge just under 200 million acres across this country. We need the Forest Service to engage with private industry to help take care of those lands. There's not enough money, even after the massive influx, when they bragged the other day at a hearing I had, that they have more money now than they ever needed, or than they ever had before, but they still need another 20 million to move one particular project. How is there enough money for them to do their job when they can't even do it now? We need the private sector to be able to access forest lands, to be able to harvest, because right now the U.S. is the #2 importer of wood products. Why are we the #2 importer of wood products when we have so much over inventory in our especially our western states, where we burn hundreds of thousands, millions of acres every year, including a 1 million acre fire in my district just a couple years ago, as well as the campfires killed 86 people 5 years ago. We need to put the Forest Service to work, or we need to move them out of the way. The private sector is an important part of that. We need industry, because the Forest Service is not and will never keep up with that. They need to get out permits, contracts, and allow this wood to be harvested in a sustainable, good way, as the industry knows how to do. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair lays before the House the following enrolled bill.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in the United States is National Ag Day. This is a day that we recognize that the food on your table came from somewhere, and it isn't just a supermarket or a truck or maybe even a taco truck like in California. Nope, it came from the hard work from a farmer or rancher producing for all of us. And one of my goals here as a member of the Ag Committee is to make sure they can keep producing and keep the food on the table. American-grown products are of the highest quality, the highest responsibility as far as labor, environment, and the whole works. But you know what? They still need the tools to be able to do that into the future. We need to pass more immediately another 5-year farm bill And like in my home state of California, we also need to have the inputs. We need to have a water supply that's steady and growing. As the population grows, we need to increase the state's water supply because more and more of it is going for other things than sustaining agriculture, which has been so strong in the Sacramento Valley and San Joaquin Valley and our whole state. So happy National Ag Day. If you get food on your plate, it came from a farmer. So if you're going to complain about the farmer, just don't do it with your mouth full. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the Biden administration has released yet another round of extreme regulations that are going to hurt consumers and the American economy. This one is on an extreme climate regulation plan. Will mandate auto manufacturers to transition to electric vehicles, all in order to get rid of carbon dioxide, which I remind you is only 0.04% of our atmosphere. Little skinny piece right there. 0.04%. Its increase is a rounding error. So in many rural areas, like I have in Northern California, the power grid already isn't that strong. We suffer with what's called public safety power shutoffs, where when the wind blows, they shut the power off because they're afraid it might blow a tree or a branch into a power line and cause another million-acre fire from our unmanaged forests that Forest Service is not taking care of. So what do we have? People are told not to charge their EVs during peak times, yet the Biden administration is pushing forward by 2032, 67% of vehicles sold have to be electric. 46% of medium trucks have to be electric, just by a stroke of a pen. These guys are not on your side. I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When people earn their paycheck, they earn their wages, they earn money off of stocks, whatever it is, they're going to spend their money on things that are a good value for them. So why isn't government, when they take their tax dollars, not involuntarily, getting a good value for them? I'm speaking in California, the high-speed rail system. I call it high-cost rail. The price is quadrupled over what the voters were sold back about 15 years ago when they were told a high-speed train from Los Angeles to San Francisco could be built for $33 billion. Well, the price tag is well over $125 billion, and it's many years behind as well. So they're still about $100 billion short of the funding it would take to complete this project. They don't even have the route mapped out. Instead, why don't we invest tax dollars that are taken from the people involuntarily in things that can really benefit them, such as a water supply, a stable water supply, better communication systems, more rural broadband, things that can help people be connected in more ways than besides a silly train that's deemed the biggest boondoggle in a long, long time, connecting LA to San Francisco. Instead, it's connecting an orchard in Bakersfield to a place called Merced. Not a good deal for taxpayers. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, the United States Congress Joint Economic Committee released a report based on the Consumer Price Index for March. They found that in my home state of California, the average household in California is paying $1,222 more per month to purchase the same goods and services as just 3 years ago, January 2021. Cumulatively, the average California household has spent $26,929 more due to inflation in that same period of time. Compared to January 21, the average household in California is spending $173 more per month on food and $25 more each month than just 1 year ago. A cumulative of $3,900 more in food costs since January of 21. The average household in California is spending $161 per month more in energy costs and $5,000 more out of their pockets since that period of time in January of 21. Shelter, housing has gone up, $4,600 more since January of 21. What's the root cause of this? Couple basic pieces. Cost of energy drives everything, and government spending has inflated. We got to stop this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, with a lot of false rhetoric flying around this country and around the world, the UN, the whole works, including today even a shutdown of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco by pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian protesters. They're sure not making themselves a lot of friends to their cause, are they? So what does it really boil down to? Since The Gaza Strip was created not that many years ago in order to give an area for the Palestinians to have. The ink wasn't even dry on the agreement before they started setting up rockets and mortars and launching them upon the people of Israel, who only seek peace. Israel only seeks peace. Yet what do they get? Deal after deal is offered, negotiation after negotiation. Truly, what it boils down to, was a great quote I saw here very recently, was that a fellow named John Spencer at West Point said, "The sole reason for civilian deaths in Gaza is Hamas. For Israel's part, it's taken more care to prevent them than any other army in human history." Let that settle in for a minute. They've taken more care than anybody
has expired.
to prevent civilian deaths. Hamas is the one causing them. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
For 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The United States is now the #1 importer of wood products. It had been China up until recently when they finally slowed down their building. This shouldn't even be possible or happening. As you see, California, the West Coast, western states have massively overcrowded forests due to the inattention of the U.S. Forest Service to keep up the pace and scale, to keep up with the amount of board feet that are growing each year. Take a look across a lot of rural America. You'll see that these areas are indeed too overcrowded with trees. A healthy forest might have 50 to 70 adult trees per acre. We see a situation where there's 500 to 1,000 trees of all sizes. So for a healthy and resilient forest, each tree needs enough nutrients, water, and sunlight to thrive. But when the trees grow too close together, they compete for these resources, are weakened, and then are susceptible to insects and other damage. So you can see on the far side of this poster a dense forest that is going to be very fire prone and very likely to be attacked by bugs or go through a drought period and become unhealthy. A thin forest like this, we need Forest Service to be doing, survives fire, is much healthier, much longer.
The gentleman's time has
need.
expired.
I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for appearing with us today, Madam Secretary. Welcome back. About 8 years ago, several secretaries ago, Secretary Jewell signed an agreement to remove the 4 hydroelectric dams along the Klamath River. And now we're seeing, with the partial work of that being done, devastation to that river that you, well, I won't say can't imagine, because we could imagine that. We knew there was untold amounts of silt that had gathered behind those dams over the years. Now they've been unleashed upon the whole river system, all the way out to the mouth into the Pacific Ocean. And so I mentioned this to you when we saw each other. Have you had a chance to take a look at any of the video or photographs of that devastation, what it meant to the wildlife and water quality, et cetera, along there?
I'm sorry, Congressman, I didn't hear the exact question.
Have you had a chance to take a look at any of the photographs or videos or what have you of the devastation by the unleashing of that material into the river system all the way out to the mouth of the ocean?
I have not seen photographs, but if you...
I'm seeing what, sorry?
I have not seen any photographs, no. But I'd be happy to look at photographs.
You really should, and if you had a chance to visit in person, because what we're talking about when ostensibly this is about salmon and the life cycle of the salmon involved is 3 years, and there's people from the department and other entities claiming it'll be a 10 to 12 year project for the silt to actually disappear. At the same time, while they have equipment scooping silt out from the lake bottom and dumping it in the river. Now, if you were a miner, if you were anybody else, that would be probably life in prison for what they're doing there, yet somehow that is deemed to be okay. So what we're looking at is the dam removal project so far is a disaster. And at the same time, we hear a lot of talk about climate change and the type of replacing our vehicles, replacing the power generation with CO2 free, right? I'm sure the department has a lot of goals on CO2, right? I mean, in general, right? carbon dioxide goals on reducing it? Just from the hip, ma'am. We don't have to.
Sorry.
Anyway, I'll keep moving on. Everybody has goals in the California government, the U.S. government on climate change and reducing all that. So at the same time we're talking about this, we are getting rid of the source of CO2-free electricity in dams and then dewatering other dams and making it where they're ineffective at running water through their hydro plants. We've barely kept alive the Diablo Canyon power plant in Central California. At the same time, we're talking about mining and the inability to extract the metals that are needed for producing the electrified vehicles and electrified everything else. So we're going in the opposite direction of both things to meet the goals that the administration and California government seems to be placing upon people to their detriment economically, jobs, et cetera. So at what point, what do you say to the public with goals like this that are wrecking the river and making it much more expensive? And let me zero in on this part. The Klamath Lake is at 90.6% capacity as of yesterday, as the lakes around California are filling up. Shasta, Oroville, Folsom's on its way up. New Malone is as high as it's been in quite a while. Yet we're seeing 40% allocation to some of the San Joaquin Valley districts. So how does your department explain that in context with people seeing skyrocketing food prices, and then we talked about hydroelectric and electricity prices? What am I supposed to say to them about the direction that this administration and your department is going?
Congressman, thank you for the question. And I know you and I have had conversations about this, and you've also essentially had an open door to the Bureau of Reclamation staff.
Thank you. Yep.
I know they're also going to be here later in the month. So I want to tell you that, yes, we understand that there was record moisture in some parts of the West. However, it's my understanding that the drought persists, and so they are working to be
even
careful with the water that we have so that people will have it into the future.
But there's not a drought. 2 years in a row, almost record snowpack. The lakes are essentially full if they're allowed to be topped off, all except for the San Luis Reservoir, which is about 25% down. So the farmers in Klamath are still, with a nearly full lake, are going to still be at maybe 2/3 of their allocation, as well as the 40%ers down south in San Joaquin. So with all that, with all this, how do you explain it to the farmers? And then let me come back to the CO2 one more time. Again, you got CO2, climate goals. What percent of the atmosphere is carbon dioxide?
I understand that you will tell me how much it.
No, I'd like to hear it from you. I'd like to hear it from you.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Oregon, Ms.
0.04%.
We've heard that before.
Once or twice. Thank you very much.
The chair recognizes the gentlelady.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And appreciate panelists coming here today. I've been looking forward to this hearing on this topic here. We have a lot of bridge history in this country, especially in recent years, and expediting the reconstruction of this is critical, I'm certain, to Baltimore and the Eastern Seaboard, as it would be, you know, in any area of the country with a artery like that. So what I'm especially interested in is what is being done, and anybody on the panel that wants to weigh in, to truly expedite this process. Because when you read about it, when you get information about it, it sounds like there's a lot of preliminaries that are, of course, necessary with the demolition of the old bridge and such. But where I get frustrated is a bog down of studies and NEPA and things of that nature with an already existing structure. This is not a pristine area. And so what is being done to make a concurrent effort to do that stuff and get categorical exclusions, but also at the same time be moving forward as quickly as possible? And some examples I have of successes as just Mr. Desaulnier alluded to, in California, now there was the Bay Bridge '89 earthquake, during the World Series, you may remember, where about a 250-ton chunk of that collapsed. And I'm not sure how quickly they got that put back up, but it wasn't terribly long when they put their minds to it. On the obverse side of that coin, you have the actual replacement of the Bay Bridge took 24 years. In '89, when you decided there was a problem with the bridge, it was decided. It wasn't completed till 2013. They started construction in '02 and completed in '13. So that's an 11-year actual construction time, but a 24-year decision to actually and to completion. The '94 Northridge earthquake knocked down significant chunks of freeway in Southern California, and the initial estimates, I believe at the time, by Caltrans or others, like, this is going to take 3 years, which would just put a giant crimp in what in movement and commerce in Southern California. So the state, and the Governor Wilson, put out a call for shortening that timeline from basically 3 years to 140 days. And one of the people involved was this company called C.C. Myers Construction Company. They got it done not just in 140 days, but 66 days, with a large incentive, a large bonus possible. So on one hand, and then the MacArthur Maze in Oakland, not my time here, but there was a problem there. I believe that was the fire. Anyway, they got done in 27 days with a bonus involved as well with the C.C. Myers Company. Unfortunately, they're out of business now. Mr. Myers passed. So what can be done as far as incentives to actually speed up the process and not take 6 years, a paralysis of Baltimore, but set aside bureaucracy and get it done in 3, let's say, okay? I mean, realistically. So anybody on the panel?
So, Congressman, and thank you for your question and your examples that you've provided. I would just say that we share your desire to reopen the bridge as quickly as possible. I would say that Federal Highways worked with Maryland to get a programmatic CE for the debris removal in April, so that they weren't waiting around for an approval to get the debris out of the channel. And we are working. They are going to issue their RFP later this month, hopefully get somebody under contract by August, which is within 5 months of the incident, and we'll hopefully be able to get them to a categorical exclusion. And they're looking at a 4 years of construction. So the plan right now is for that bridge to be reopened in 2028, which I don't know that there's any other authority that we could exert to get that done any faster.
Okay, thank you. Currently, the movement of goods and commerce is very important. So is there anybody, maybe Ms. Homendy or others, a look at maybe providing a waiver for trucker hours, because they're going to face 2 or 3 hours of delays. Is there a way that truckers' hours can have flexibility for time of duty on that, as well as the ability to use the tunnels there for ordinarily what trucks wouldn't be allowed to do?
Thanks, sir. That would actually be under U.S. Department of Transportation and FMCSA working with the state. They can make waiver requests for truck weight, and also I'm not sure on the trucker hours. I'll be happy to get back to you for the service hours, but certainly.
Yeah, please look into that. If locals are saying that would be helpful in order to complete, you wouldn't want to run out by 2 hours or something with the initial delay would be. But also, is there an issue of the tunnel being available to all types of trucking? In other words, restrictions on certain types of trucking that could be helpful. Could you have a waiver on maybe hazardous materials having a certain time of day that they could access it, for example, that maybe they can't otherwise? Just looking for ways for flexibility. That's what I'd be asking. Would those be possible thoughts, do you think?
The gentleman's time has expired.
Okay, thank you. Can he answer that?
Yeah, quickly.
Thank you.
Happy to follow up with your office, sir, on those questions.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back.
Does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute or advise and stand
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. National Police Week is our opportunity to slow down a little bit and recognize those officers that put it on the line for us each day, each week, each month, each year. They face a lot of obstacles that they encounter in their efforts just to keep us safe and keep criminals off the street and hopefully prosecuted. When I first entered into the political realm as a candidate, I met a deputy one time who was so frustrated with the state at that point of the criminal justice system. He told me that he was aggravated that those that he arrested would beat him home from being released before he could even get the paperwork done. So as we see the situation with prosecutors not prosecuting, with a revolving door in our jail system, we really need to dig deep and not only thank our officers, but also pass legislation that supports them in their efforts to do what we ask them to keep the streets safe and not have ridiculous defund the police efforts happen in some of these blue cities. Indeed, they're feeling the regret of defunding them at this time. I yield back.
For what purpose does the...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my district in Northern California, there's this catastrophic removal, destruction of the Klamath dams. They're hydroelectric dams that provide clean, CO2-free power for about 70,000 homes. It's reducing the renewable grid that everybody seems to want, eliminating recreational assets, hurting property values, damaging the local economy, and making it tougher on agriculture in the Klamath Basin. You see many of these products right here that are grown in California, 90 to 99% of what America relies upon, even 100%, some of those same crops are grown in that Klamath Basin. Won't be able to do that much longer if they keep tearing out infrastructure and taking the water away. The removal of these dams currently has released many millions of cubic yards of accumulated silt, which has ruined the water quality, killed hundreds of thousands of fish and the spawning beds they would have laying new smolts in. We've seen even full-size deer getting stuck in this and dying in that mud. Governors of California and Oregon seem willing to ignore these because they think it's a win to tear out the dams. Local farmers, again, are suffering. The project borrowed water from the dams to extend the irrigation system. You won't have that flexibility anymore with that out. You won't be able to grow some of these crops that Americans enjoy and rely upon. So we have this devastation going on all in the name of the environment, all in the name of saving some fish. In the meantime, they've destroyed and killed hundreds of thousands of fish and will continue to do so with this reckless dam removal that won't end here. It'll keep going. We'll have less hydroelectric power, less stored water, less recreation with this crazy type of thinking. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a little geographic update. Mr. Huffman claims he represents the basin. No, you represent the last 50 miles of the river from Selmsbar
lower. I
to
said
the ocean.
lower.
Huh?
I said lower. I
That's not
represent
the
the
basin.
lower.
It's not the basin. The basin, Mr.
Go back
Benson.
to geography class.
You need a geography class.
Gentlemen.
You've been screwing around up there for long enough.
Gentlemen.
Mr. Liskey, I hear your concerns with the agreement there, and they use the word minimize in the process up there of impacts to you, and that's probably enough of wiggle room for them to do a lot of regulatory things that are still to come after the dams have been destroyed, and as well as a good chunk of the economy up there. So talk to me a little more about your concerns, though, with the Keno Dam being turned over to the Bureau and what kind of implications that could be for new costs to the growers there.
Well, I mean, Keno Dam right now is being regulated strictly mainly for the fish going downstream. And it looks like there's over a $20 million upgrade that needs to be done, plus fish ladders upgrades if the salmon are coming back upstream. And all those costs, as it looks like now, will be put onto the Klamath project users. And in our agreements, that has been said it would not be. And this is what the bill is trying to do, is make sure that those costs do not come to the Klamath project users.
Right, right. But that'll probably be seen as a handout to the growers rather than the original promise of the project, which was set up for agriculture, not fish, not other things, right?
Correct. I mean, the water that's stored in the lake is under Oregon water laws stored for irrigation.
Yeah, they keep ignoring that, that law. So, Mr. Palumbo, the Klamath project was the second one ever authorized, and it has a responsibility of the basin and adjoining counties, Klamath, Modoc, and Siskiyou. Does the Bureau have any accounting for these costs or proposals to compensate the counties for all the things that have been mentioned with removal, the mitigation, et cetera?
Thank you very much for the question. I appreciate that perspective. Reclamation is in the process of developing cost estimates for all elements of the agreements that are going to be in place if this law is passed, including the Keno Dam replacement costs, or Keno Dam improvement costs, Link River Dam improvement costs, and costs to restore the Klamath River after the dam removal.
Well, I mean, I'm already talking about the damage to the local economy as it is. The dam being removed in Klamath is the largest property tax asset they have there, as well as the 3 dams in Siskiyou are the 3 largest property tax assets they have there. So they're already, you know, you're talking about forward-going plans. What about the ones that are already, the effects already there in place? Is that something that you're looking at with some kind of compensation for the property owners or those counties?
Congressman LaMalfa, we'd be happy to sit down and work with your office to determine what those...
These are already happening. These things
Correct.
are already damaging the economy and the people of those areas. You have so far no plan in place after all these years of KBRA and all these other years of all the movements been made by both states as well as FERC and such to do so?
There's several elements that are part of the amended KHSA agreement as well as the KPFA that provide revenues to the counties, and Reclamation supports the agreements that were made. I think furthermore, the legislation, if passed, moves those agreements into law, which will ensure that those benefits do go to the counties and go to the other beneficiaries that are identified in the legislation.
All right, so part of the effort is that and as I said, minimize the effects on people up there with power rates. So can you point to any specific plans that would decrease the cost to the basin for power and through energy conservation or efficiency?
Right, there's a number, Reclamation undertook a study in 2018 as a result of the agreements that were passed to look at ways in which to offset, defray, minimize cost impacts resulting from the removal of the dams. They include looking at hydropower purchases, other power purchases.
From where?
Excuse me?
Purchases of hydro from where?
From the Western Grid through the Western Area Power Administration.
So I'm going to run out of time here quick. Currently, hydropower is about $20 a megawatt. Wind is about 53. Solar is about 68, and offshore wind is 115. So how are you going to, if you don't get the hydro from somewhere else, or is there a plan to install new hydro on the Klamath River to keep the low-cost energy? How do you intend to have the lowest cost power in the area?
Currently, there are no plans for additional hydro on the Klamath River.
Right.
There are provisions in the legislation that cap the reimbursable requirements for power that would be implemented. That would have the net effect
Cap
of
it on the
reducing-
users or cap it on the government?
Gentleman's time has expired.
On the users.
Cap the user cost or cap the government?
Gentleman's time has expired.
On the users.
Answer the question for the record. Go ahead. Did you have an answer?
Madam Speaker, as we are on the precipice of another Memorial Day in this country, we have so much to be thankful for and grateful for as we pause to remember those that have fallen to defend our country, our way of life, our Constitution. So from the fields of Valley Forge to Tripoli to our own homeland of the Civil War, of San Juan Hill, the trenches of France, Pearl Harbor, Normandy, Iwo Jima, the 38th parallel, the jungles of Vietnam, Iraq and Afghanistan, and others, we are grateful for those that stood up and stood in the line of fire for us, for our values. Indeed, from John 15:13, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. We owe them a lot. We can never pay that back other than to be grateful and to remember those that have fallen for our nation. I yield back.
Thank you. For what?
Speaker.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, if you've observed the West during the summer or fall months the last few years, maybe longer than that, you would see that fire season is soon upon us and has had devastating effects. One example would be a 1 million acre fire, one fire of 1 million acres in my district just 3 short years ago. So what are we doing as a federal government to combat that? Moving pretty slowly. The U.S. Forest Service, under its watch, has allowed, due to lack of ability to get access to the forest and get the type of board feet out that needs to happen, we've seen in the last 15 months 50 individual sawmill closures since March of 2020, well, up to March. So with all these closures, 1,500 sawmills have closed since the year 2000. Where's the capacity going to be to process these logs and turn them into something useful if the private sector isn't allowed to take enough harvest because of the Forest Service lack of action? So million acre fires, imports. U.S. is now #1 in imported wood when we have all this wood standing out there. It makes no sense. We've got to move much quicker. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent. LaMalfa for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Chief Moore, for appearing today. We go back a long ways, don't we, to the west. So let's talk about the harvest numbers for a moment here. I would like to understand better how you're arriving at a 30% increase over how many years was it? 20?
Yeah, last 20 years, yeah.
Because the chart I have, the information and the trend seems to be over a much longer period of time where harvest being these olive colored ones here going from, this is still the late 80s right here, 12 billion board feet down to the low of about 2002. So if you start at 2002 and trend up from there, you can see a slight increase, but a fairly flat one in board feet, but a dramatic drop off from here. And then it's doggone it coincides with acres burned vastly increasing at that point too, as we've suffered so much in the West, especially on that. And so I would like to understand how you're arriving at board feet harvested. Is that the terminology you'd like to use on that?
Sold. Board feet sold.
Sold. So does that mean it's delivered?
I mean, it's sold. I'll give you an example. And we can break it down by each area.
Well, I'd like to just, time is short, and I'm not going to get New Mexico time probably, but board feet sold versus actually delivered. I want to know how many feet are coming out of the forest in marketable timber or lumber.
Well, that was it. I mean, our target this year is 3.2 billion board feet.
Which is a lower number than last year, and there's projected to be a lower number for following years, but we had these huge numbers years ago.
Well, it's actually more than what we actually achieved last year.
Achieved, yes, but you fell short of the goal by about 250 million board feet of last year's goal.
Yeah, there's a lot that's not being brought up in this conversation, and so
I know, and it's tough 5 minutes at a time here, but when you talk about litigation a bit earlier, stopping you from hitting that goal by 250 million feet, why isn't and just an idea, I'm not trying to be mean here, but why wouldn't you put out more bids, open more bids so that you have more being litigated at the same time and more of them actually fall through the hole and make it and then reach the number?
Well, that would be an approach, Congressman, but that's not the one that we're choosing to do simply because
why don't you choose to do more? Because we're suffering out here.
We don't have the ability to do more than what we are currently
You just had a
doing.
massive influx of money here from the IRA recently that they told us at a hearing in Spearfish, South Dakota, they said we have more money right now than we've ever had. Yet they still wanted 20 million more to help do a project there that the Nyman company needed. They've just laid off 50 workers there at their plant in Spearfish because they can't keep up. They can't get out in the forest enough to do. They needed about 120 million acre feet, water guy, board feet to do the job. And as of March, they only had 10 million over the whole year. And so they have since subsequently laid off 50 people there. We've lost 50 mills in the last 18 months or 15 months or so. I don't know where the infrastructure is going to be to process what it is the output is. Let me ask a number from you here. So if we're putting out 3.1 to 3.4 billion, how many board feet are being grown in your forests in a year? How much of the trees just out there growing per year?
I think, so there's about 3 or 4 questions there, and so.
Well, just the one. How many board feet are you growing on your 193 million acres, you think,
Well,
annually?
how I'm going to answer you is that there's different ways to look at that. And I know if some of your friends in the industry is giving you a number, they're looking at
I don't
saying,
have a number off the top of my head. No one's giving me a number. I'm asking you, sir.
well, we're cutting below the ASQ, if I looked at all the plans across the country. And we're cutting that below ASQ because we don't have the resources to cut more than what we're currently cutting.
So do you think we're growing about 6 billion board feet per year out in our forests, maybe?
I can't give you that with any confidence.
It's got to be in that ballpark, 5 to 6 billion. Let's just go, but we're cutting 3.5 as a goal. So over a period of time, how are we going to ever keep up with the amount of board feet that are growing and the density we're talking about? You know, Ms. Stansbury was talking about the power lines a little bit, and I hope people can support the Farm Bill because I have a piece in there to expand the gap between power lines and the forest from 10 feet to 50 feet. And we had to pass a law in 2018 to direct your agency to be more timely in getting permits out to take hazardous trees. And so we're trying to build upon that because, 10 feet's not a lot when the power line is shorter than the trees next to it. I'd like even wider than 50 if we want to take it, because as Ms. Stansbury said, we're shutting down people's power. Like in Tehama County, sometimes I drive through there in the past, and the whole county shut off at night in Northern California because the wind might blow in this first world country and cause a power line problem. So we need a lot better output on board feet taken because it's not keeping up. And I would certainly like to hear more about your numbers on how you come up with that trend over the 20, 30 years versus an actual decrease in what you're expecting to do the next 2 years with 200 million board feet. Let me close on the idea that your budget will be, you're trying to free up 1.36 billion to take it into emergency spending, which means a lot more discretionary. Do you intend to purchase electric vehicles with this freed up money that is going to be in your main budget now?
I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if we do purchase some electric vehicles.
Will that be in the forest, or will that be running around in DC with those?
Congressman, I understand your position on this.
No, I'm just asking the question, though. Are you going to buy a bunch of electric vehicles?
Well, the other thing that we're trying to do to complement that is also look at electric plug-in spots on some of our campgrounds so that the people that do have electric vehicles can plug in while they're out visiting the recreation.
But we don't have enough money to help the spearfish in Spearfish, South Dakota, to be able to get their timber harvest done. I'll better yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Yep, we're off New Mexico time now. I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Utah.
Thank you.
And before you start, Mr. Curtis, the chief has agreed that we are going to evaluate these numbers that are being put out. We're seeing some discrepancy.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. LaMalfa for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In my home state of California, I'll direct this to Mr. Gardner, our high-speed rail project went from a projected ballot item that told the taxpayers it would be a $33 billion project to go from SF to LA and be completed by the year 2020. And a good portion of that, above the $9 billion bond portion that the voters voted on, the rest would be from private investment, attracting private investments. So far, the private investors have stayed away in droves. The $9 billion has been burned up, and the projected cost is, instead of $33 billion, is at least $128 billion. And there hasn't been a mile of actual track laid yet, other than some of the roadbed that has been put down and some of the bridges. They also at the time claimed that there'd be 1 million jobs up until, a couple of years after the ballot measure. Then they finally had to admit 1 million job years, which at the present number they tout of 13,000 workers, the math I did would say if you have 1 million job years divided by 13,000 workers, that'll take 76 years to build the project, which they're right on track for that at this point here. So this will be at least 2030 something before they get one of these segments done. So, Mr. Gardner, how could they be so far off on an initial business plan that they told the voters, the taxpayers, in 2008 to what we have now, where there's nowhere near 128 billion? They might be able to put their hands on 20 billion when they do carbon taxing, and they just filched another $3 billion out of the federal government here recently. So, when they're 100 billion short, where are they going to get that? And how could they be so far off on the plan? They didn't even have the route figured out before they put this in front of the voters.
Well, Congressman, certainly Amtrak's, as you know, not been involved in the high-speed project directly or its original
supportive in your
development.
comments.
We are supportive of advancing high speed, and similar to Congressman Bolton's point, we think there is a real role for high speed in various markets in the United States, and California certainly has incredible markets and huge demand and real challenges in terms of mobility. But I think the main issue, and something we've learned, and an issue that's also faced Amtrak, is that quite often, because there hasn't been the apparatus to fund or develop early planning phases for good ideas, when folks are trying to sort of develop concepts for these systems, which I think could create a lot of value, they're doing so before we've gone through the standard preliminary engineering, design, NEPA processes that really do set the envelope of cost and schedule.
What did you just say for the last 40 seconds there? What did you just actually say right then?
So that one of the challenges when doing big projects is the amount of planning and the time for planning to get the project developed. And so what happened in California is really, I think the California high-speed team could explain the process, but I would say that for any project to really, a big project to be something that folks can understand in terms of estimating cost and time, you've got to go through this environmental process, and the environmental process and the planning process are really what set out the possible envelopes. So you asked me what happened from their initial estimates to now.
If you have an idea,
it's that process.
How a plan could be that far off, and we have bigger plans going forward. Let me talk about a more local one. Dunsmuir, California, up in my district, has used to have a twice-a-day connection there. During the pandemic, as they call it, was all halted. So now there's only one a day. You have to catch it around somewhere between 1 a.m. or 4 a.m., depending. So the local economy, and this is just one typical rural town, that rural areas are some of the least utilized service routes, and they have much more interruptions. So with Amtrak setting forward to do very optimistic work, how are we going to see that the rural areas are going to have any share of this that's going to be significant instead of being the tail end of the whole system?
Well, Congressman, we've got our Coast Starlight service is serving Dunsmuir and the other several stops in your district, and there is also supplemental bus service that serves some of the stations, Chico, and I think up to Reading as well. That's funded by the state of California in partnership with Amtrak, the connecting bus service. So I think maybe the change in service is the bus service levels, but we believe, as you heard from our chairman, in investing in this national network. Right now, the big changes that are happening are new fleet coming to better serve communities like Dunsmuir, and investments across all of the stations so that we have accessible stations and also stations that are
Thank you.
ready
I have to cut you off there due to time, but new fleet isn't going to change the fact that there's no trains running through there, and that we don't have the model be successful out there with passenger rail. It seems the freight has to somehow keep railroads in business. So with that, I'm way through time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you. Mr. LaMalfa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Scribner, in talking about the electric vehicle and the Highway Trust Fund situation, the trust fund has been backfilled by about $280 billion since 2008, bailouts during the COVID era, all sorts of issues along that line with the bailout. So with the huge push on electric vehicles, there really isn't a good mechanism yet for them to be taxed in a way that's commensurate with what combustion vehicle cars are doing. What do you see, from your viewpoint, would be the fairest way of doing that? I'm looking at, there's ideas for taxing everybody by the mile, or maybe just do that with electric vehicles, or some other method. What do you see as the best way for making the EVs be part of the solution?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I do believe the future is shifting our revenue collection from per gallon taxation to per mile charging, where the method of propulsion of the vehicle doesn't matter. So the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act did reauthorize a state technical assistance grant program for states to conduct pilots on these kind of mileage fee approaches. And it also established a national pilot, which is yet to get off the ground. But I do think, and that's something Reason Foundation has worked on for a couple of decades, is that the long-term shift will be away from per gallon toward per mile charging. And I think that not only does that incorporate electric vehicles, and in fact, the declines we've seen in fuel tax collections per vehicle mile traveled have primarily come to date from improving fuel economy of
That's the perverse thing in that, is that everybody's been incentivized or shoved into getting better mileage vehicles. And so government then says, like, heck, we're not getting enough out of you gas tax dollars, so we got to hit you another way now. What do you think about, though, with the possibility of how intrusive keeping track of people's mileage is going to be? I mean, such as GPS or the meters as you drive past, like on toll roads. How do we do that in a way that isn't in people's business personally, on tracking where they're going and such?
Right, so that's an excellent question, and privacy is a top concern and a major focus of the research right now. The simplest way is to simply not collect location information. Hawaii, for instance, recently established what will become a mandatory mileage fee program, and what they do is they leverage their annual safety inspections and collect odometer readings, which they already were. They were collecting odometer reading information, and they are simply then applying a fee to that.
Not every state has an annual requirement. You have to go visit somebody and take time out of your day or your week to do that. So some have 2-year smog checks. Newer vehicles don't have to go for their first smog check for 6 or 8 years. So now we have another trip people have to make to go report something. Is there a way we can do this on an honor system where I can just fill out a form annually if I can afford it, or quarterly if I want to pay quarterly, or an estimate? How about that?
Well, perhaps not, maybe not quite the honor system, but there are applications. You can take a picture of your odometer reading with a cell phone and then be subject to occasional random auditing. So there are ways to
a picture of my odometer, or maybe my neighbor's odometer? I mean, at what point do you decide you trust people or not?
It gets these mechanisms, and there is a trade-off between privacy and auditability for any of these systems.
I'm pretty big on the privacy side, sir. So, I think let's design a system where people aren't being followed around even more so for the government to take money from them, right? So let's shift gears to high-speed rail in California. One of my favorite things to talk about, since it's such a boondoggle and a rat hole in my home state. So what do you see as, let's just shift to, let's keep you with Mr. Scribner. Now, you've seen how that thing has been estimated $33 billion to begin with, was what the voters were sold when they agreed to $9 billion worth of bond money. And it's since risen to $128 billion and counting, and it's many, many years behind. Please expound on the idea. Is high-speed rail really the be-all, end-all, or is there other forms of public transit that can be helpful?
I think the system that is being built very, very slowly in California has suffered a number of many predictable problems, some less predictable. But this is something we've also worked on at Reason Foundation for the past 2 decades, predicting many of these problems that we turned out to be a little more optimistic than reality. I do think that high-speed rail may serve but potentially some niche routes in the United States, but given the geography and population density, it's unlikely to serve nationwide customers, and I think that it's a mistake to oversell the potential of high-speed rail.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Larson.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields. Mr. LaMalfa is recognized for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary, thank you for appearing with us here today once again. Appreciate it. Let's see. So on electric vehicles and the chargers, in the infrastructure bill a while back, there was $7.5 billion put forth for that. $5 billion that was allocated to states individually to build their own networks with that seed money. So the report I have is that since then, we've seen an intense amount of money go out, but we've only accomplished approximately 7 charging stations spread amongst 4 states. So we have this term investment that doesn't seem to be hitting much of a goal, as people are still frustrated with the electric vehicle owners we have still seem to have a lot of challenges finding what they need in order to go more than 30 miles from home, for example. So, and then the nature of the EV stations themselves they're exempted from the Buy America provisions. So we're buying these components from China and other overseas. So that's disturbing, because we should be building it here when we are, and we would have the ability, which leads to a couple more questions, but Secretary, with my understanding there's another $1.3 billion that was added to that initial 7.5. Why are we doubling down on more when the performance so far has been basically only 7 stations?
Well, so to be clear, there are 186,000 public chargers across the United States. That's about double what it was when President Biden arrived. Most of those have been put in by the private sector, but we believe that public sector involvement is necessary to build out the rest of the network, hence the NEVI program that you referred to. That program is intended to install tens of thousands of chargers in the second half of this decade, and we've already had 38 of the states that we're providing funding to release their solicitations for the program. We're even going to see the first few hundred of those chargers installed this year. As you mentioned, there's even a tiny handful that are up and running today, but I want to emphasize our expectations have been that the peak year for installation would be 27 or 28, because this is a totally new program for the states. I do want to emphasize also that this charging program is subject to Build America, Buy America provisions. There is flexibility in that to recognize the fact that we're standing up what's effectively a new industry in the United States. But we're committed to making sure that that new American industry is homegrown, is creating jobs right here on U.S. soil. And as the states work toward their procurement, we think we're going to really see that demand signal lead to a burgeoning of that industry here in the United States of America.
The difficulty of the Buy American is that we don't seem to be able to produce in this country. Well, the mined raw materials have to come from somewhere else, and then the manufacturing pretty much stays in those other areas, and so we're not doing well at Buy American on what comes from the mines as well as the finished products. So
well, that's a big part of what we're changing through the President's initiatives. DOE now estimates, with the new awards, for example, for producing a domestic battery supply chain, that we will have enough graphite to support 47% of the U.S. demand domestically. We're also working on partnerships with friendly countries so that when we do need to turn abroad for materials or refinement, we're not necessarily turning to places like China. And increasingly, recycling will be important.
Well, let me drill down on that.
Some of these materials live indefinitely.
Thank you. Let me drill down on that. Would you be part of a group of voices that would say we need to mine these products in this country instead of somewhere else?
Certainly would prefer that they be sourced domestically.
Okay, thank you. On the EVs themselves, now we're seeing that there seems to be a turning around of attitude on that. Like Ford Motor Company, they lost $4.5 billion on them. They're down, they're bringing down the price of their electric pickup quite a bit, which that's probably going to be a loser for them. I don't know. And they're letting their dealers off the hook from having to install hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of infrastructure to be EV dealerships. So you see a retraction of that, as well as 7 in 10 Americans said they don't not want to buy an EV because it takes the charging isn't there, the battery technology. And then current EV owners, half of them are considering switching back to gas vehicles. So shouldn't we be tailoring it to people that want them? It seems like 10 or 15% instead of forcing people up to a complete ban by 2035 like California's talking?
Well, one of the reasons that we have not forced anyone to purchase any particular vehicle is we want this to be led by consumers making choices. And consumers are choosing EVs more every single year than they did the previous year. And I think that reflects the fact that as the prices come down, more and more Americans decide it's the right answer for them.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I come from California, which there's a certain amount of risk in saying that because we do a lot of wacky things there. It's a wonderful state, wonderful geography, wonderful weather, so many great things, but the governance sometimes, I don't know. What we're exporting currently is a lot of the work of the California Air Resources Board, which currently is trying to regulate locomotives into technology that doesn't even yet exist, and therefore foist that same non-technology onto other states, because we're talking the logistics of moving freight in California, but also out of California that can't be moved because they don't have a plan for that. We would have them have to switch switch locomotives at the border, or with CARB's plans, they don't really care about that. They want us to just make everybody in the whole country have to buy locomotives to meet a Tier 4, they call it, which isn't even available yet, let alone beyond Tier 4. They want to go to zero emissions, which isn't really zero, with so-called electric trains, okay? They're not even available. The technology isn't there, and all this by the year 2030. Imagine the logistics of getting food from California, which people rely on. 90 to 99% of certain crops come from California. We won't be able to ship them out, as well as the military material that might need to be moved out of our state in times of war or conflict. Anyway, don't do what we do in California. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia seek recognition?
Ms. Chairman, thank you for this hearing. Ms. Arias, when you talk about early on in your conversation that within 1 mile of the tracks is 90% of the emissions, but don't we have to acknowledge when towns were first built and settled, they were either along the coast with ports, they're along rivers, and with the advent of railroads across the country, towns located right next to the railroad, because in any case, they want major sources of transportation to move freight, people, et cetera. And so kind of implied with what you're saying is that maybe all towns need to be at least 1 mile away from railroad tracks to not have emissions. And then you have to acknowledge too that sometimes the rails were there, sometimes the airport was there first, that property is cheaper next to those, is not as desirable, and so they move homes into those areas that only because they're cheap and people with lower incomes can afford to move into them. So whose fault is it really that people live near these areas, developers or people that choose to buy homes in these areas? We have to look at that on the other side. So, Ms. Arias, when CARB fully acknowledges that people are going to go out of business, especially short line railroads, which are an important integral part of what the long lines can't do and what we don't, what Mr. Moulton was even talking about, do we want to shift this to trucks? How can you, in good faith, develop a policy that you fully acknowledge is going to put an important sector out of business and at the end of the day, drive up emissions? How does that work?
Thank you for the question, sir. As it relates to the analysis that we have in our report, that report does not take into account any sort of the incentive programs or other opportunities we might be able to work with Class 3 railroads. As mentioned earlier, there has been a significant application pool this year to help the Class 3s get to compliant engines. In addition, we intend to support them and work with them to continue to seek those fundings as we're moving forward.
Okay,
We're also specifically talking to each of the class lines individually and trying to determine what is the cheapest and easiest way for them to move through the regulation.
Okay, let me stop you there, because maybe there is no way for them to move through the regulation. There are small outfits. They don't make a ton of money in order to change this technology. Mr. Olvera, or Mr. Nober as well, when they talk about availability of Tier 4 engines, which, you know, my stats here show me that if we're at Tier 4 engines, if you just took a breath for a minute at CARB and let everybody come up to Tier 4, you've achieving 85 to 90% cleaner versus older technology. That sounds like a win to me, but you're already jumping ahead to 5 or 6 or all electric. And Ms. Arias, you're saying like, well, we can take this diesel engine out of a Tier 3 or 2 or whatever, and we'll put this newer one in. You don't say that we're going to put a new diesel engine in. You're talking about putting an all-electric thing that doesn't even exist yet. How does that work? Because I want Mr. Nober and Mr. Olvera to talk about that for a moment. How is the Tier 4 availability of those engines coming along here? Can we even replace everything with Tier 4 at this moment? Because Ms. Arias said that it was new technology as of about 2015. That's only a few years ago. We expect all these things have been changed to Tier 4 by now.
Tier 4 engines are limited in availability, and with locomotives or railroads requiring their locomotives to all upgrade in an abrupt time frame, that limited inventory is going to be taken over very quickly.
So we're jumping past Tier 4 with this mandate, right? We haven't even filled out Tier 4 availability. They want 5 or 6 or whatever number you want to call it, right?
Yeah, there's very few locomotives in the short line industry that are at Tier 4 level. We were my railroad was one of the pioneers jumping to Tier 3 engines starting in 2008. At the time, that was the best available or highest tier available, but Tier 4 is just getting started.
Well, it's a lot like the trucks in California. They say, hey, get up to this newest tier from 2011 or newer, and you'll be fine for a long time. Then wham, they change the regs, and those trucks are now have to be phased out by 2030. Same with people in good faith trying to do their local. Mr. Nober, touch on that too, please, with Tier 4 availability and the massive, 85, 90% cleaner if we were just all at Tier 4.
Well, as Mr. Lowell, as I indicated before, when Tier 4s were first required, it took a long time to iron out the operational issues with them, and only one manufacturer it's ever actually been able to produce working Tier 4 locomotives. Currently. When they first came out, then again, there were many problems with them, and they kept breaking down. And for a railroad, at least at BNSF where I used to work, they have to operate in Arizona in 120 degrees in the summer, in Montana and minus 50 in the winter, on a 24/7 basis. And if there's a failure, that becomes a significant issue in a network industry. And so reliability is a very important factor, I think.
Thank you. And here we are jumping past a tier that isn't even ready yet with new regs with non-diesel engines, right?
I don't think that there are, again, I'm not a locomotive expert, but I don't
the
think that there are
requirements.
feasible, I don't think that there are feasible locomotives that
I got to reclaim my time, sir. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Yes, the gentleman yields. Thank you so very much. Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to emphasize how important the situation is in California right now, across the board with our resources, our water supply, our timber, our mining, and our agriculture. Right now, of course, you're probably reading a lot of headlines about the fire situation, how much of our forests and open lands are in big trouble. And you're going to hear that side of the aisle talking all day long about climate change. Like, well, I'd throw back at them. If the climate is changing, what are we actually doing as people on the ground about it, besides figuring out who we're going to tax, or whose car we're going to take away, or whose gas stove we're going to take away? What are we doing practically about making our forests more fireproof or fire safe? What are we doing about our water supply to make sure that there's more water stored so that people, agriculture, and yes, even the environment can use it? What are we doing more to ensure we have a stronger electrical grid So what is it we have happening? We see that they want to tear out part of the electrical grid in the form of hydroelectric dams in Northern California, as well as up in Oregon and Washington, et cetera. It's just one after another. Hydroelectric dams provide CO2-free electricity, if you want to worry about the CO2. Now, CO2 only makes up 0.04% of our atmosphere, but they're using it as a weapon in order to force us to change our lifestyles. So let's store more water, so we have it for agriculture, so we have it for hydroelectric power, so we have it for all the matter of things that we need water for human use and environmental use. So let's move the ball on that. In my own district, we have a project called the Sites Reservoir that's been talked about for 50 years. It seems to be coming close to fruition of actually getting started to be built, but there's still roadblocks that can be thrown up. There could still be weaponized lawsuits to try and stop the building of Sites Reservoir, which would be 1.5 million more acre-feet of storage for California, as well as its positive flood control benefits when you're pulling that water out of a flooded river system into that reservoir. So why can't we think ahead a little more on these issues with our infrastructure? Agriculture in California is one of the most important components of our food supply for this whole country that you can imagine. We have so much that we grow in California, from the Sacramento Valley to San Joaquin Valley, that many of those crops, 90 to 99% of it, are grown in California. If we don't grow it there, we're going to have to import it, or we have to do without. If we have to import it, then it means it's going to be higher cost, or it's going to be lesser quality, or it will be a not reliable constant source if they want to play trade games against us with it as well. Why don't we produce it in California? We have the water supply. Hundreds of thousands, millions of acre feet even, escape to the sea each year because we're not storing it, we're not trapping it, we're not putting it into groundwater recharge, which would be extremely helpful for the San Joaquin Valley, especially where they've had the ground has actually subsided. It's sinking somewhat. They've pulled a lot of water out of the ground in order to do agricultural activity. But that said, agriculture also means groundwater recharge. If we're flooding those fields, if we're irrigating those fields, it percolates back down in there. Instead, they take more water away, and they want to, away from the farmers, and they want to replace it with, they call it solar farms, which is an insult. Why would you call that a farm? Indeed, we're finding more and more that these massive solar arrays, as well as windmills, can actually change the climate in the area where they are. Think of the concentration, think of the heat sink. We see that in urban areas. The urban heat sink from so much pavement, so much concrete, so many buildings. Yeah, it raises the temperature. So you want to talk about temperature once again. What are you going to do to the San Joaquin Valley, where their idea is to take more and more ag land out and put so-called solar farms in? We need to have our state be much more productive in keeping agriculture going, keeping the jobs going, having a domestic food supply that's reliable. And so with that comes that infrastructure, building more water supply, not tearing out our hydroelectric dams, but actually preserve them, and adding more to our electrical grid. We have the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant that's been in place for 40 plus years. It was almost going to be decommissioned here this year and next year with the 2 different reactors. It bought 5 more years. Well, we need 40 more years for that plant, and we need more plants like that. We have small nuclear plants we can be building more and more around the country to keep our electric grid stable. And right now, when you see the temperatures in California, and a lot of the West perhaps, over 100 degrees, 105, 108, even some other areas are really high, it's going to be really tough on our electrical grid because we don't seem to have the foresight to produce the electricity. So all these things work together for affordability for families just to stay in their homes and run the air conditioner and have a stable food supply that's halfway reasonable in cost. It's a domestic food supply and one that brings jobs to our backyard and the water supply that we all need to do. We need all the above on this. I yield back. Last year, the California's air regulator, known as California Air Resources Board, finalized a new rule that would require freight railroads in the state to adopt zero-emissions locomotives for industrial use by the year 2030, only 6 years from now, and for normal hauling by 2035. It is now requesting a waiver from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to proceed with this rule. This EPA CARB rule would effectively require all locomotives to operate in a zero-emissions configuration when operating in California. Sounds nice in theory, doesn't it? This regulation would limit the useful life of thousands of locomotives currently across the rail network and requires transition to zero-emission technology. So what is that going to do to the cost of moving goods with technology that is not even yet available widely? Even by CARB's own admission, this rule will drive many short-line railroad operators out of business, gone. Short-line railroads are very important for moving freight in the interim from manufacturers, from granaries, from whatever, out to the main line. So we're just going to eliminate them. So what will we replace them with? More trucks. We love trucks, but there's a role for trucks, for short line, and for long-haul railroads. CARB also admits this rule will be shifting the transport of goods to many more trucks, much more truck traffic. They admit to that, which is opposite of their stated goal in reducing emissions. Rail operators have not even been able to acquire full Tier 4 locomotives yet due to the availability and the stretch in technology, which isn't there yet. We can't acquire Tier 4 locomotives, which is already being bypassed by new tiers that CARB wants to push with basically going to all-electric trains. Well, this isn't the all-electric train you have in your basement. This is real world here. It would make more sense for the bureaucrats at CARB to just take a break for a little bit from their carbon-neutral crusade and let rail operators come up to the Tier 4 standards that the locomotives that they're still trying to develop in being compliant. These Tier 4 locomotives are 85% cleaner than other older technology already. So that sounds like a win to me. You know, that's a bingo, as some might say, instead of pushing net zero locomotives on such a ridiculous timeline. Because of their obsession with net zero and carbon reductions, CARB is actually working against their own goals they're stating here. It is estimated that U.S. EPA approval would result in close to 65% of the nation's Class 1 railroad fleet, locomotive fleet, to be banned from operating in California by just 6 years from now. General Van Ovost, from the U.S. Head of the U.S. Transportation Command of our military, expressed concerns that regulation will negatively affect the economy and as well as the military readiness posture, you know, moving the tanks and the heavy equipment you see sometimes on the rail, these big, long trains of military having to deploy wherever. By reducing the ability to transport this military equipment in and out of California from different parts of the country, it could severely impact their ability for military readiness. So when I asked in committee about this of CARB yesterday, they said, well, military is going to be exempt. Well, I guess that's good. So the things that are really important, CARB is going to exempt. So I guess goods movement, movement of agricultural products, movement of food, isn't as important. Instead, we're going to be force-fed this rule. A large collection of national, state, and local agriculture groups have expressed great concern that with this CARB rule, it poses a significant danger to U.S. ag, its ability to transport ag product domestically or to our ports. We already have enough trouble getting stuff into our ports. It needs to be stated that technology for these replacements does not yet exist on these new types of locomotives. Freight railroads contribute only 0.5% total U.S. greenhouse gas, as defined by WHO, emissions, and 1.7% to total transportation-related greenhouse gas. All of this to reduce the amount of CO2, carbon dioxide, which is currently only 0.04% of our atmosphere, practically a rounding error. Again, EPA approval of this rule would result in close to 65% of the nation's Class 1 railroad locomotives to be banned from operating. Man, what is that going to do to our supply chain? Only by 2030, with Tier 4 locomotives not even fully available yet, let alone the next set of technology that they're trying to mandate. It will slow our farmers from getting food to our tables and our ports, rotting in the fields or at a siding somewhere while waiting for an electric train to recharge and be able to go another 100 miles. It will delay and raise price in materials used to build and heat our homes, raising price for middle-income and lower-income families anyway, who are already struggling with inflation and so many policies from this administration. Every stage of automobile production and sale, including EVs, will be pushed by the same people who are also pushing this rule. Bureaucrats are once again going after anything carbon-related without considering the effects of this crusade against carbon. We need not follow the California Air Resources Board as a whole country.
Gentleman, time has expired.
They're not even elected. They're appointed by the governor. Yeah, they might be elected locally to a supervisor or something, but they're not elected by anybody to be on the CARB board. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes gentlewoman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pugh, We're talking about disparity of speed limits when you're on, we've all been on the freeway, and especially if it's 2 lanes going one direction, 2 lanes the other. And so I call them turtle races. I guess that's maybe a common phrase or not. So you got one truck passing another truck, and they're stuck going 55 on that particular piece of freeway, while cars can go 70. So talk a little bit about the difference in speed and what that does with drivers, as frustration, and then also just the disparity in speed of how that dynamic acts with safety in general. Whereas if the trucks are able to go the same speed, let's say they can all go 65 or 70, like in some states, what's the safer situation?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, there's plenty of data out there to show that a 10-mile-per-hour differential between trucks and cars creates 227% more times that they interact. Interactions, of course, is where we have accidents. If we are really concerned about speed, and as I was talked to prior to you, if we really want to do something about it, instead of differentiating the speed between cars and trucks, then lower the speed for everybody so everybody's going the same. That's all we want. That's what trucking wants, is cars and trucks. So if you're going to limit trucks to 60, then limit cars to 60, because it's proven over and over and over that all traffic traveling the same speed limit is the safest. We're down to 7 states now, I think, in this country that have different speed differentials. I also think that a state probably should be deciding their speed limit, not an agency here in Washington, D.C., because I feel like Montana probably has a better idea than Washington.
I'm from California, and we have a disparate speed. They're 55 and 70 typically on I-5 I use a lot. And if we leave it to California, it'll probably just get dumber, but we'll see. Speak a little bit about the availability of trucks with these mandates going with EPA, joining with CARB to basically outlaw diesel engines by a particular timeline. And then going to much heavier. You said 10,000 pounds more? I've seen as much as 16,000 pounds additional weight by 2 sets of batteries on a truck, which is 1/5 of the gross weight of a vehicle at 80,000 pounds, additional weight. Now you take the diesel engine and the tranny out, and you probably have a different rear axle if they're all going to be driven at the wheels, I suppose. So you're not really taking that much weight off the truck when you add all that electric. So anywhere 10, 15, 16,000 pounds more weight, as you mentioned, we need 20% more trucks to do the same work. Does that seem about right, as far as the gross weight?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I pulled a flatbed the majority of my career, hauled a lot of Mr. Bell's steel here and out of the High Valley, and we got paid by the weight. So not only would I be able to haul less steel at one time, I would make less money because I wouldn't be able to haul as much of a payload.
Well, and the steel guy's got to pay 5 trucks instead of 4 to get it hauled, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So now talk about availability of, especially to smaller trucking outfits. Like on my farm, we got used trucks, and they're on the older side, except for where the state has said I can't run my 2003 anymore. So I had to have them 2011 and newer. But what does it mean when mom and pop truckers are going to be mandated to have vehicles that they can't afford because they have to be a certain tier, a certain timeline? Emphasize that a little bit, would you please?
That means these folks are probably going to go out of business, which is going to have another direct effect not to highway safety, because you're taking some of the safest operators off the road. These people who, like myself, who own their own trucks, have their own businesses, most of them run used equipment. They don't want to buy new equipment. For one, the used older equipment, as you well know, is much more dependable. You can get along with it better, and you can work on it yourself, and it's very expensive to own and operate.
The average farmer trying to fix this electronic gear on a truck, they only get to use 5,000 miles, 10,000 miles a year. Or even, the guy that hauls hay for us here, they don't put that many miles on, so a used truck that has 400,000 when they buy it is pretty useful to them. So lastly, this comment here that the more lane miles you add, the more congestion you get. So does that mean we're going to have less congestion if we tear out lanes on the highway? You want to take a stab at that, Ms. Osborne, as well as Mr. Pugh? Because that just doesn't compute for me, is that Let's make it one lane. We ought to have zero congestion, right? How the heck does that work?
Sometimes we do see traffic evaporate as we shrink our roadways and shrink the footprint. I'm just reporting on the facts. I'm looking back at federal data.
Traffic will evaporate if you make the roads smaller.
We have seen that occur when highways come down and a lot of reconnecting.
Is this because you frustrate people so much they don't even want to use it?
Because it's just the principle of choosing the best path. People will choose different times of day rather than taking discretionary trips during the most congested hours, things like that.
So like if there was less restrooms, would it be shorter lines for the restroom?
Well, I love your restroom example because it's like saying I should have 7 bathrooms in my house because I'll have a party one time of the year and I need to make sure no one stands in line.
Has traffic all the time, have people going in and out for entertainment, moving products and all that. I can't believe we're sitting here saying that the more miles we tear out, the less congestion we're going to have with a growing population.
The results of more miles have not been good.
Pardon?
The results of our strategy have not been effective.
Well, if we're have more and more demand faster than we build, that might be one thing, but tearing out, anyway, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman. That's all I can do. We've concluded our round of questions here, but I would allow a second round of questions for anybody that wishes to. I'll have one myself. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for others that would like to as well. Let me come back to the automated devices. I'm going to focus this on Mr. Pugh once again here. Now, in my personal life, I get really tired of getting gonged at all the time because I left the key in the ignition, or I'm driving around my fields there and I don't have my seatbelt on because I'm jumping in and out and irrigating. And you can't shut the damn things off, you know? The dealer says, oh, it's a safety thing. Like, well, you know, I have enough of a brain to figure out when I can do it safely or not. But we're not given that credit, and especially as truckers who put in lots of miles, many, many miles as professionals. So more and more things are being done to take away their discretion and their ability, especially mom and pop truckers that are maybe not covering the vast majority of miles or hours doing so. So you got, again, we're talking about automatic emergency braking systems, the speed limiters we talked about, ELDs, which are not very highly favored by the smaller truckers, and then truck shutoff devices that automatically shut the truck off after reaching hours of service limits. Now, nothing mankind makes is perfect, and so these systems can all glitch. I have to wonder about, you know, and we're seeing this on automobiles, cars and pickups, that they glitch, and you got automatic braking if it detects you're too close to another car, and so you're driving along and the car's jerking on you, trying to do things automatically for you. And, you know, people aren't perfect, but neither are the devices. So, Mr. Pugh, talk about, in a scenario I've heard about, is that with the automatic emergency braking systems, what if you're driving an 80,000-pound rig in an icy condition and something detects that we need to jam on the brakes? What does that do to upset the control of the truck in that situation, or others that you know of that you can tell the committee here today?
Yes, thank you. Yes, in short, it'll put you into a skid if you're not real careful or don't know what you're doing. That's where I point out the fact, as I said earlier, cars are much different than trucks. Trucks way longer. It's 65, 70 feet long. The tires are bigger, where the wheels, the tires are at on the road at the time. Then you add in the different kinds of loads. If you're hauling a low load or a piece of some pipe or something, it doesn't stick very high on your trailer. You have a lower center of gravity. That handles completely different if you're hiring a giant single coil that weighs 50,000 pounds and 6 feet tall, but only 4 feet wide. You're very high center of gravity. It's easy to tip. Put liquid into the mix. If you pull a tanker, I pulled a tanker for a little bit. I jokingly said it felt like you're on a boat all the time because as you're going down the highway, that stuff's in there sloshing. Now you're on an icy road and you hit the brakes, or they automatically just lock up, and that chemical or something that's in that tanker comes forward, it's going to put you in a heck of a situation. You're going to be passing yourself.
The trucker is thinking about that load as he's going, whereas the automatic device just wants to be automatic, right? And
yeah, I mean, as a trained trucker,
effect of a liquid and such.
And in my opinion, as a trained trucker, and this is what we should be looking at, is training truckers instead of coming out with all kinds of electronic devices to dumb down the industry. Let's train the people behind the wheel to drive the truck. I hauled frac sand for a long time down West Virginia in the mountains. You have to know what you're doing to drive off-road and go up the side of a mountain. I mean, I was pulled up the side of a mountain with a dozer. It was so steep. You can't make computers, in my opinion, that can do these kind of things. And you know what? We all forget, and you said it yourself, Congressman, computers have bad days too. I can't get my freaking phone to sync to my 2022 Ford pickup truck half the time. Now, I think that's pretty basic technology, but it doesn't work a lot. But now we want to put all these things into trucks and say, hey, you're safer now. We teach pilots to fly the plane before we teach them to fly the plane with all the technology.
Well, we
Let's
had an
teach
issue
truckers to
with
drive a truck.
737s that they had too much gadgetry on there they're relying on instead of the pilot knowing how to fly the plane. And I wholeheartedly agree with you on that, the more automated it is, the easier it is for people to get lazy on automobiles. Truckers are pretty disciplined, but talk quickly about the automatic shutoff devices for reaching hours of service. Now, since these things can glitch, my tractors glitch, my combines glitch, I mean, what kind of scenario would you see of a possible engine shutoff because it reaches hours of service while somebody is still actively driving? What's the possibility of that?
To be clear, Congressman, I don't think there's really a device that shuts your truck off because you're nearing out of service. You do have the ELD in your truck, which keeps track of your hours of service. And what that will do is once you go over, it's going to flag you in violation. Right. Where that becomes a problem, if I may, is drivers every day are left with this decision on whether they can park their truck in a safe place to take a break or be in violation to try to find a safe place. We saw a tragic accident in Illinois 6 months ago where a bus hit a truck that was illegally parked. That trucker had to make that decision, and he was tired, so he pulled off on that ramp to get a break because we don't have enough parking in this country. I drove by that ramp last week going back to Kansas City from my home in Ohio visiting family. That ramp on Sunday morning at 8:30 in the morning, there was 10 trucks down that ramp and out along the side of the highway, that same ramp, because we still have nowhere to park these trucks.
I've seen them, yep. And then we still have the problem, are they carrying a hazardous product or livestock that, they got caught in traffic and they need an extra bit of time? There isn't that discretion to get to a location that's safe or be able to offload the livestock. Sometimes you need an extra hour, and then the rules come down so hard upon them. So in general, what we're hearing is that and close on this, Mr. Pugh, that we have a general regulatory direction that seems to take away the ability of the individuals to make good decisions, make safe decisions, because the government's overriding and a device is overriding. Is that the general feel of your drivers, of your industry?
Yes, I think that's a general feel. I think my drivers would like to start seeing common sense regulation that's coming from experienced truckers, and instead of making regulations on a false, fake driver shortage narrative, which we've seen over.
Mr. Speaker, in the United States, over 1/3 of all food produced is never consumed, including a significant portion of livestock and animal products. Now think about that for a minute. For the amount that is consumed, half of it is not. That's equivalent of 143 billion meals, enough to feed every American 3 times over for a year. This waste comes at an enormous financial cost. Over $473 billion worth of food is thrown away annually. Beyond that monetary loss, this waste results in unnecessary consumption of resources, water and energy. The production of animal resources demands significant amount of water and energy. When food is wasted, so too are these critical resources. When meat is discarded, all the water used in its production is wasted as well, which is a high water use. Energy expended in raising, processing, transporting these products is lost, wasted, contributing to inefficiencies and waste of resources. Farmers, I am one, invest countless hours, labor, and resources into growing crops and raising livestock. It drives us crazy to see it wasted. Transportation also plays a crucial role. We lose that energy. We must do better on utilizing our food so kids don't go hungry. I go back.
For what purpose is gentlelady? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The situation facing Israel is critical and it's escalating. The nation's under attack, not just from isolated factions, but from a coordinated effort orchestrated by Iran. Rockets have rained down on Israel from Lebanon, the Gaza Strip, and Yemen, forcing Israel to defend its citizens and its sovereignty from these relentless threats. It's crucial to understand these attacks are not random acts of violence, but are part of a larger, more coordinated plan. Each of these regions there exists a militia backed by Iran. In the Gaza Strip, it's Hamas. In Yemen, it's the Houthis. In Lebanon, it's the Hezbollah. These groups are not acting independently. They are funded, supplied, and directed by Iran as part of a calculated strategy to encircle and weaken Israel. The current situation is exacerbated by the policies of previous U.S. administrations and currently the Biden one that's only encouraged Iran. Secretary Blinken recently warned that Iran is potentially within weeks of nuclear weapon capabilities. It's not hyperbole, it's a dire reality. I appreciate greatly Israel Prime Minister Netanyahu today speaking to us to underline how important our alliance is with Israel and that victory is the only acceptable outcome over the vile acts of Hamas. We must stand with Israel. I yield back. Mr. Speaker, an electric vehicle mandate presents serious challenges to our economy, families, and everyday life. While these vehicles are often promoted as the future, they come with significant limitations and cost. Long-distance travel can be difficult due to fewer charging stations that are needed by far and longer refueling times rather than just the few minutes it takes to fill up with gasoline or diesel. This and compared to gas-powered cars. Also, we have this feudal program at the federal government that has so far put aside $8 billion a while back, and what we've got out of that, 7 charging stations. 7. Now, there might be no more by now, but it's pathetic. This is particularly problematic in rural areas like I represent, where there isn't the infrastructure at all to manage to have the electricity, the amount of load the power lines would need and carry isn't even there yet. So how are you supposed to travel outside of a city area? Maybe it could just be a city mandate, who knows? They have high upfront costs and horrifically high costs when you go to have to replace the batteries. And heaven knows we've seen what happens when they catch fire. You can't put them out. We need not force these vehicles on a public that does not want to buy them. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, we had a field hearing in Central California with our subcommittee chairman of water, Cliff Bentz, facilitating, and hosted by John Duarte, my colleague from Central California. We were talking about the water supply issue for the state of California. Now, why do the rest of you have to hear about water in California? Because these are the crops that California grows, right here on this poster, that somewhere between 90 and 99% of them are grown in my home state. If they aren't grown there, then U.S. consumers will not receive them. They will have to get them from somewhere else, some other country, with whatever quality issues, with whatever supply steadiness issues you might get there. So it's important that the water supply in California continue to be directed to agriculture instead of directed to the Pacific Ocean. We are losing tens of millions of acre feet because we can't seem to harness the water with the existing dams we have because they let it all out due to dubious environmental supposed needs, whether it's fish, whether it's the smelt, which no longer really exists in the Delta, so they find another smelt to call endangered and take more water away. We need water for agriculture to feed this country. I yield back.
I will now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa, to address the House for so much time as you may consume.
Thank you again for my colleague from Utah for leading this tonight, as we certainly have plenty of things to talk about and what Congress and our federal government should be doing. The topic I'm going to hit on is the crime situation. Now, you'll hear different things reported in the news on how is crime in the U.S. Well, I think normal people, regular everyday Americans, see that it's a problem. But the way it's reported or the way it's spoken about under the Biden-Harris administration is like, oh, crime is not a problem. Crime is down. Tell that to the people, the storefront owners in various blue cities we see these massive break-ins by hordes of people smashing their way in and smashing the countertops and all that, taking cell phones and jewelry and whatever else might be on their minds. So where do they come up with these statistics, though, like crime is somehow down? Well, we're seeing more and more evidence that perhaps the mayors of these blue cities, perhaps other leaders, are telling their people to not report them. So if the police departments in many jurisdictions around this country are underreporting what's really going on, I guess that's how you can skew the statistics to look like they're better and that crime is somehow down. But I tell you, theft is up, breaking and entering is up, violent crime is up, and it's due to lax policies. Now, as a member from California here, it's very acute in some of our large cities, as well as we have these soft on crime recent efforts being made by the Newsom administration and others that have basically made it almost a free-for-all in my home state. For example, the dollar amount got bumped up several years ago via one of the propositions, fooling the voters as to what the proposition was actually doing on crime. You know, Prop 47, which is one of the big problems, was known generically as a Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act, yet all it did was relax the level of felonies down to misdemeanors to the level of $949. That means you can steal $949 worth of stuff out of the store and still have it be just a misdemeanor instead of a felony as it should be. So people go in sometimes with calculators and add up, how much can I steal? And brazenly carry it out the door because there's not enough police around, and of course the retailers, especially the large corporate box retailers, say, oh, don't dare go try and impede them, don't go talk to them, don't even go out in the parking lot and take a picture of their car or their license plate because we don't want to offend them or we don't want to incur that somebody might get injured. Well, I tell you, people are getting injured by this happening. The price of everything, the stores, I mean, look how many stores are closing around the country as it is. And then tell that to the mom and pop stores that only have one or maybe two markets that they deal with, and that they're not supposed to do anything about this rampant crime, the rampant stealing happening in their places there. So this was put in part by, in my home state, legislation called AB 109, which is supposed to be trying to help empty overcrowded prisons, as they termed it at the time. Now, I don't know if the prisons are overcrowded. I've actually had a chance to visit them, and thankfully they let me out of them when they were done with the visit. But you see prisons designed with 2 bunks in them, and they're only keeping one person in there due to somebody's idea of how that would be crowded. And so what else happens? When the federal court ruled that California had overcrowding, they started trying to release prisoners to meet a number, but also the state had several outside of the state prisons it was contracting with to take some of its extra prisoners. What do they do first thing? They bring those back. They bring them back from out of state, which are that. They're actually getting a good deal on the cost of keeping them in those out-of-state prisons. They actually brought them back home so they could crowd them even more and have even more to release. Does that make an ounce of sense to anybody? So crime is up in California because they're releasing more. Under AB 109 called realignment, it pushed more and more hardened criminals down to the county jail level, which means now the county jails have to deal with them. Now when they got more normal neighborhood crimes, or even something up to the level of assault or stealing a car, things like that, there's no room for them. So they're releasing people normally would have a local county jail on their own recognizance or on a small amount of bail or what have you, until now they get rid of bail as well. So you keep pushing the problem down, and now we have chaos at the local level for what our sheriffs, our jailers, our district attorneys have to deal with locally. It all starts at the top on this. And so with the crime wave you saw during the riots that one summer, like in Portland and Seattle and Minneapolis, especially I want to underline Minneapolis here, because where the Biden-Harris administration wants to claim crime is down, you saw Kamala Harris actually advocating for people to send in money so they could bail out the people that were there, that were arrested for all the chaos and damage and vandalism and burning of Minneapolis. Oh, let's chip in to help get them out, because she thought that was some form of justice. Now, in this campaign, she seems to want to run away from all that and run as a, changing her spots to some other, as a political chameleon would do. So there's no lack of crime. There's no lack of prisoners. In my home state, again, bringing the ones back from private or other prisons out of state to crowd ours even more, and then closing down more and more prisons. Gavin Newsom has in mind closing down 4 more. And I keep telling people, it's not like we're running out of bad guys. Our population of the state and our country increases anyway, so you think generically the number of prisoners or number of criminals is going to increase probably commensurately with that, especially in these times when we're encouraging people to do it with lax laws. So you had AB 109, you had Prop 47 fooling the voters by saying it was somehow a Safe Neighborhoods and Streets and Schools Act. Indeed, it just lowered the level. Then Prop 57 came in and it had some horrific crimes that made into just misdemeanors and less, including some forms of date rape and things like that. It's horrific. So those 3 things will help put California in this mess, and a lot of times this body here tries to emulate what California does. And certainly the White House, bringing a lot of Californians in when they came into power to emulate what California does. And that ain't good for the country. So what we have in California, for example, now is to counteract a lot of the provisions of Proposition 47, is one currently on the ballot called Proposition 36, which will restore some of the jail sentence lengths, some of the crime classifications back up to what really should be a penalty, and doing other things that are going to tighten up the idea that crime is so far paying in California because they can walk away and get away with it. You're seeing more and more as people go into these markets and stores and big box stores, and when they're catching somebody coming out, obviously with armloads of stuff they haven't paid for, they're disguising themselves, et cetera, that this is somebody stealing. You're seeing more citizens stepping up saying, nah, I'm not going to watch this happen. They're detaining because the store won't do it. So I consider that kind of heroic, actually, but some in the corporate level might say, oh, they shouldn't do that because someone might get injured or whatever. But, when the buyers, when consumers see that their prices are going up because you can't keep insurance anymore, they go into a large box retailer and find everything is locked up. I don't know if it's this way all around the country, but the retailers, many of them in my home state, are locking up a whole bunch of the items. You have to go ask a clerk to come open it up so you can get into the makeup counter or some of the medicine counter. I hear even like socks and underwear in some cases are being locked up behind glass, or the tool section. And you have to have people come help you to get these items because it's going to walk out of there otherwise. So crime is down? I don't think so, because we're seeing those effects. You're seeing in places like San Francisco more and more corner markets and drugstores. They might have quite a few of a particular chain of drugstore in downtown. Well, they're closing several of them, because of the rampant conditions of theft and other things going on in the city. Why are they promoting this? Why are their city leaders allowing this? It's a mystery to me. But it does start at the top, and when we get the signal being sent from the White House and even Congress of soft on crime, this is what the results are going to be. So again, in my home state, voters have an opportunity with Proposition 36 to turn back that tide at least somewhat. Even the retailers were behind it there, which generally they're kind of afraid to upset the apple cart in Sacramento because of the 3-to-1 Democrat majority there, and they don't want to make them mad. But so far they're sticking with it, which is actually admirable for a change. So fentanyl, drug charges that have been made weaker during this time would actually be increased and put back in place in Prop 36. We're not talking about just a guy being caught with a little bit of marijuana, as Kamala Harris has kind of made famous. We're talking about serious drugs and serious amounts of them being dealt out there that is going to be curtailed, at least in part, by Prop 36. And so I hear it's polling quite well, and I hear Governor Newsom has actually given up on it too. He went so far as to say, with all the support for Proposition 36, because the people are speaking back with their initiative process, that they're tired of the crime, they're tired of the inaction by the government, that he says, I don't know what state I'm in. Well, Governor, I think I agree with you, because I don't know that you know what state you're in either. It's pathetic. And he doesn't seem to care much about neighborhoods and regular folks that have to deal with this stuff. Lastly, this crime extends to our border. And we're talking about this Biden-Harris administration, the czar, Vice President Harris, allowing 530,000 illegal immigrants to be flown in on aircraft into our country and then turned loose because we can't possibly process them. They're ending up in your neighborhoods. And they're overwhelming some of these neighborhoods. They're overwhelming the school system. They're overwhelming the other services, hospital, all that, because they're just flying them in for an unknown reason. They'll try and cloak themselves in the idea that they're helping refugees or something, but it's way beyond that, especially when you find, talking to them at Border Patrol, that a high ratio of them are coming from China, and these are likely going to be agents of China's efforts to undermine the United States. So, we're expecting also maybe another 800,000 of them are going to be attempted to be brought in by the Harris-Czar situation. They get 2 years of humanitarian parole and work permits, but they're not even tracked whether they depart or not. You know, completely blowing the idea of what asylum is as a temporary respite for people in a bad situation in another country. You know, we're still sympathetic towards that, but there's no holds barred on how it's being abused, especially these last 3.5 years. ICE officers are overwhelmed by the work that they're having to do at the border and with the expectations of parole that they have to deal with. 8 million illegal immigrants have come into this country under this administration. 8 million. That's more than the size of several states. But they go on and push the Border Patrol out of the way and take their jobs and really demean them. The morale is as low as it's ever been. But the last kicker on top of this, when the administration orders the Border Patrol agents to underreport, to skew the statistics, to basically be forced into lies about how many people are coming in, especially those on the terror watch list, we've got a serious problem. People need to be brought up on charges for that. Not the Border Patrol guys that are trying to execute their plan, but people in the administration that are telling them to lie about it. How pathetic, how deranged. Excuse me. So we have a lot of choices to be making in the next few months here. And the American people, tired of the crime, tired of the civ at the border, can make some very clear choices if they want to improve this. In my home state of California, Prop 36 will go that way. But also demanding from your politicians that they care about them and their communities and their storefronts and their ability to do normal business like the United States used to be until this administration has made such a farce of our borders and fighting crime. So with that, Americans, please pay attention this fall and ongoing. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you to the gentleman from California.